Good morning, my dear friends. How are you? I am starting your next question 4 of exercise 10.1. In figure 10.6, a square. Figure 10.6, a square. Identify the following vectors. Number 1, co-initial. In this given figure, we choose which vectors are co-initials, equals, collinear but not equals. Before solving 1, 2, 3 questions, we shall read about co-initial, equal and collinear vectors. Co-initial vectors: two or more than two vectors whose initial points are same, then vectors are called co-initial vectors. We can also write as two or more than two vectors which have same initial point, then vectors are called co-initial vectors. Example 1. A vector, B vector. Here given example in 1, A vector and B vectors is starting on one point. It means A vector and B vectors have same initial point. So given vector A, vector B are co-initial vectors. Here two vectors, here we take more than two vectors, that is three vectors, vector A vectors, B vector and C vectors. A vectors, B vector and C vector are starting on same initial point. Same initial point. So given example, vector A, vector B and vector C are called co-initial vectors. Next definition: equal vectors. Two vectors A and B are equal if they have the same magnitude and direction. We can also give definition of equal vectors. Two vectors, vector A and vector B, have same direction and same magnitude, then A vector and B vectors are called equal vectors. Example 1. A vectors and B vectors. Here given example, vector A and vector B have same magnitude and also same direction. So given example, A vector and B vector are called equal vectors, collinear vectors. Two or more than two vectors are said to be collinear vectors if they are parallel to each other. We can also give other definition of collinear vectors. If two or more than two vectors parallel to each other, then two or more than two vectors are said to be collinear. Example 1. Vectors A and vectors B. In this example, A vector and B vector are parallel to each other. So, given example, A vector and B vectors are collinear vectors. In example 2, vectors A and vector B are parallel to each other. So, given example of two A vectors and B vectors are collinear vectors. Now, we shall solve question number 4, because we have read about co-initial equal collinear. Here given figure is a square. Then we know about a square that quadrilateral which has four side equals and also each angle are 90 degree. Now we see in the figures which vectors are co-initial vectors. We know that two or more than two vectors whose initial points are same, then vectors are called co-initial vectors. In this given figure, vector A and vector D have same initial point. So, A vector and D vector are called co-initial vectors. We can write co-initial vectors, vector A and B vector. Next question. Equal. We know that about equal vectors, two vectors A vector and B vector are said to be equal if they have same magnitude and same direction. Now we see in the figures which vectors are same magnitude and same direction. In this figure we see B vector and B vector have same magnitude and same direction. So in this given figure, B vector and B vector are equal vector. This is your answer of equal vectors. Number 3 questions. Collinear but not equal. We know that about collinear vectors, two or more than two vectors are said to be collinear if they are parallel to each other. We see in the figure which vectors are collinear but not equal. A vector and C vector are collinear, and also B vector and D vector are collinear vectors. But we must be answer only collinear but not equal. We have read in two questions equal vectors. In equal vectors, B vector and D vector have same magnitude and same direction. But in this given question are saying from us collinear but not equal. In this given figure, we see that A vector and C vectors are collinear but not equal. So our answer is A vector and C vectors.